When their dog brought home a bear cub, they thought it was a mistake. Now, their family. The scent hit Rusty's nose like a lightning bolt, sharp, wild, and unmistakably distressed. The old Labrador paused mid-stride, his paws sinking into the spring snow as he tilted his head, ears perked forward. Dawn was just breaking over the Colorado mountains, painting the snow-laden pines in hues of pink and gold. But Rusty had no interest in the scenery. Something was calling to him from the thicket ahead. Rusty had been with the Morgan family for 8 years now. Jack had brought him home as a puppy, a wriggling bundle of copper-colored fur with oversized paws and an insatiable curiosity. Sarah had been skeptical at first. A hunting dog in a house with a toddler seemed like a recipe for chaos. But Rusty had proven himself gentle and patient, especially with little Lily. The Morgans' cabin sat nestled in a clearing, surrounded by 50 acres of pristine woodland. Jack worked remotely as a software developer, and Sarah was a freelance illustrator. They had moved here 5 years ago, seeking solitude and a simpler life after the frenetic pace of Denver had begun to wear them down. For Lily, now 10, the forest was her playground. Though lately, she'd become withdrawn, spending more time in her room than exploring the woods she once loved. Rusty knew something had changed with his smallest human. The scent of sadness clung to her, and she no longer giggled when he brought her his treasures, interesting sticks, peculiarly shaped rocks, or the occasional pine cone. Even his most impressive finds, like the time he'd rescued a disoriented rabbit from a shallow stream and gently deposited it at her feet, had only earned him a half-hearted pat. But this morning's discovery might be different. The distress call, not quite a sound, more a feeling that tugged at his instincts, led him deeper into the forest. The scent grew stronger, mingling with the metallic tang of fear and something else. A wild musk that made the fur along his spine stand on end. There, in the hollow beneath a fallen pine, something small and black shivered against the snow. Rusty approached cautiously, his nose working overtime. Not a cat. Not a fox kit, though similar. This scent was richer, more complex. A forest predator, but just a baby. Rusty recognized the underlying notes of milk, hunger, and abandonment, the same notes that had clung to the orphaned rabbits and fox kits he'd found over the years. The tiny creature whimpered, revealing a pink tongue and miniature teeth in a muzzle that would one day be powerful enough to crush bone. But now it was pathetically weak, its eyes barely open, its round ears twitching at Rusty's approach. A bear cub. Even in his dog mind, Rusty understood the significance. Bears were to be respected, avoided. Jack had trained him well on this point. But this wasn't a bear. Not really. It was an orphan, like the others he'd found, only different. Smaller than it should be, with ribs visible through patchy black fur. Rusty made his decision. With the gentleness of an experienced retriever, he closed his mouth around the cub's scruff and lifted. The cub went limp instinctively, a pitiful mule escaping as Rusty began the journey home. Oliver, though he wouldn't receive that name until later, remembered little of his early life. Fragmented impressions swirled in his developing mind, the warm, milky scent of his mother, the rough texture of her tongue as she groomed him, the comforting rumble of her breathing as he nestled against her in their den. Then came the terrible cold and emptiness. Hunger that gnawed at his belly like fire. Stumbling through snow deeper than he was tall, crying out for a mother who never answered. The bone-deep certainty that he was dying, that the cold would claim him as it had claimed his mother. His last memory before Rusty found him was of curling into a tight ball beneath the fallen tree, his small body shaking uncontrollably as snowflakes drifted down through the branches. He had no concept of surrender, but his infant body knew when to conserve the last of its energy. The sensation of being lifted by the scruff shocked him back to consciousness. In his mother's absence, this was right, to be carried to safety by a larger creature. He went limp, ancient instincts quieting his protest despite his fear. The creature carrying him smelled strange, not like bear at all, but somehow safe. Warm. Living. Movement. The sway of being carried. The changing sense of the forest. Oliver drifted in and out of awareness, hunger and cold having weakened him to the point of delirium. When consciousness returned fully, he was surrounded by overwhelming new sensations, warmth, unfamiliar scents, and the sound of voices unlike anything in his limited experience. "Jack! Jack, come quick!" Sarah's voice carried through the cabin, pulling Jack away from his computer and Lily from her book. Sarah stood in the mudroom, still in her robe and slippers, staring down at Rusty with an expression of pure astonishment. Rusty sat proudly, his tail sweeping an arc through the dust on the floor. Between his front paws lay a small black bundle, trembling visibly. "Is that a cat?" Lily asked, pushing past her father for a better look. "No, honey." "Stand back," Sarah cautioned, putting an arm out. "I think it's a fox. Or maybe oh my God." Her hand flew to her mouth as the creature raised its head weakly, revealing a distinctly bear-like muzzle and rounded ears. "It's a bear cub," Jack breathed, instinctively pulling Lily a step back. "Rusty, drop it. Leave it." But Rusty didn't move, except to bend his head and gently lick the cub's matted fur. The cub made a soft mewling sound that struck Sarah right in the heart. "Jack, look how thin it is. It's starving." She knelt slowly, keeping a respectful distance. "And so young. Its eyes are barely open. Mama, we have to help it." Lily's voice held more animation than it had in months, since the bullying incident at school that had left her withdrawn and silent. Her parents had worried constantly about her retreating spirit. Now her eyes were wide and focused, her voice urgent. "I'm calling Wildlife Services," Jack said firmly, pulling out his phone. "They'll know what to do." While Jack made the call, Sarah cautiously approached the cub. Rusty watched her carefully but made no move to protect his find, seeming to understand that Sarah meant no harm. "It's so cold," she murmured. "Lily, can you get that box from the recycling and bring that old blue blanket from the linen closet?" By the time Jack finished his call, the cub had been settled into a makeshift bed, a cardboard box lined with a soft blanket, placed near the wood stove where the heat would reach it without becoming overwhelming. "Well?" Sarah asked as Jack pocketed his phone, his expression grim. "There's a storm coming in. A big one. The ranger says all the roads up here will be impassable for at least 3 days, maybe longer. They can't get anyone out to us until it passes." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Lily recognized as his worried habit. "They're sending instructions for temporary care, but they were very clear, we're not to get attached. As soon as they can reach us, they're taking it to a wildlife rehabilitation center." "But Dad, it'll die if we don't help it," Lily protested, already kneeling beside the box where the cub lay curled. "It's breathing shallow." "We're going to help it, sweetie," Jack assured her. "We just can't keep it. Bears aren't pets, they're wild animals that need to be with their own kind." Rusty had settled himself beside the box, his amber eyes never leaving the cub. When Sarah approached with a dropper filled with warm formula, mixed according to the ranger's hasty instructions, He moved aside just enough to give her access but stayed close, his body radiating protective warmth. "It's a boy," Sarah announced after a careful examination while administering the first feeding. "And I'd guess only a few weeks old, far too young to be without his mother." "What happened to his mom?" Lily asked, her voice small. Jack and Sarah exchanged a look over her head. "We don't know for sure," Sarah said gently. "But mother bears are very protective. She wouldn't have left him willingly." "I'm naming him Oliver," Lily declared suddenly, like in the book. "About the orphan." "Lily," Jack began cautiously, "remember what I said about not getting attached." But it was too late. As the tiny bear cub suckled weakly at the dropper, his eyes closed in desperate concentration. Something shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. A connection formed, tentative and fragile, but undeniable. Rusty sensed it, whining softly as he nosed the blanket closer around the cub's body. Sarah felt it as she watched the formula disappear drop by precious drop. Jack recognized it in the determined set of his daughter's jaw. And Lily knew, with the absolute certainty of a child who has found her purpose, that Oliver belonged with them now, whether for 3 days or forever. For Rusty, the arrival of Oliver awakened instincts he hadn't known he possessed. The Labrador had always had a nurturing streak, evidenced by his gentle behavior with Lily and his careful retrieval of injured woodland creatures. But Oliver triggered something deeper, more primal. Perhaps it was the cub's utter helplessness, or the way he curled trustingly against Rusty's warm flank. Whatever the reason, Rusty appointed himself Oliver's guardian, mentor, and substitute parent. He barely left the cub's side those first critical days, offering his body heat when Oliver shivered and alerting the humans with insistent barks when the cub needed feeding. Oliver's earliest impressions of his new world centered on Rusty. The dog's heartbeat became the rhythm that lulled him to sleep, replacing his lost mother's deeper, slower pulse. Rusty's scent, a complex bouquet of pine needles, woods, and the ineffable essence of dog, became synonymous with safety. As the snowstorm raged outside, turning their mountain clearing into a white wilderness cut off from the rest of the world, Oliver began to thrive under the Morgan family's care. The formula feedings, administered every few hours around the clock, put weight on his bony frame. His fur, which had been dull and patchy, gained a healthy sheen under Rusty's persistent grooming. By the 4th day of the storm, which had intensified beyond the initial predictions, Oliver had graduated from the cardboard box to a small enclosure Jack built in the corner of the living room. It contained the box for sleeping but allowed the cub space to practice his wobbly walking skills. Rusty would lie beside the enclosure for hours, his nose pressed against the mesh, watching as Oliver explored his expanded world. On the 5th day, something remarkable happened. As Sarah and Lily prepared Oliver's morning formula in the kitchen, a strange sound emanated from the living room, a hesitant, raspy approximation of a bark. They rushed in to find Oliver sitting on his haunches, his head tilted back, attempting to mimic Rusty's earlier greeting to Jack. Rusty looked as surprised as the humans, his head cocked to one side as Oliver tried again, producing a sound somewhere between a bark and a cub's natural mewl. Lily burst into laughter, real, uninhibited laughter that made her parents exchange astonished glances. "He thinks he's a dog," she exclaimed, dropping to her knees beside the enclosure. "Oliver, you're a bear, not a puppy." But Oliver, encouraged by her reaction, only barked again, looking immensely pleased with himself. Rusty responded with a gentle woof, as if approving of his protégé's efforts, and Oliver practically quivered with pride. From that moment, Lily became Oliver's devoted human. She spent hours reading aloud from the wildlife books in Jack's study, absorbing information about black bears and sharing it with anyone who would listen. She created detailed feeding charts, monitoring Oliver's weight with the precision of a miniature scientist, and she talked more than she had in months about Oliver's progress, his personality, his future. "Did you know black bears can smell 7 times better than bloodhounds?" she informed her parents over dinner on the 7th night. "And they can run up to 30 miles per hour. That's faster than Usain Bolt." Sarah caught Jack's eye across the table, a silent communication passing between them. Their daughter had returned to them, awakened from her protective shell by the unexpected arrival of the orphan bear cub. Whatever happened when the roads cleared, that gift was immeasurable. Oliver's world expanded daily as his strength returned. At first, it was enough to explore the confines of his enclosure, to practice standing on his still wobbly legs, to bat at the toys Lily dangled through the mesh. But as his confidence grew, so did his curiosity. On the 10th day of the storm, which had settled into a pattern of heavy snowfall followed by brief, tantalizingly clear periods before the next front moved in, Jack decided Oliver had outgrown his initial space. With the ranger's reluctant permission, conveyed during one of the rare periods when phone service was restored, they began allowing Oliver supervised freedom in the living room. For Oliver, this was a revelation. The textures alone were overwhelming: the plush carpet that tickled his paw pads, the smooth coolness of the hardwood in the hallway, the intriguing roughness of the stone hearth. And the smells. Every corner held new information, stories written in scent that his developing nose struggled to interpret. But most exciting of all was the ability to truly interact with Rusty. No longer separated by mesh, Oliver could press his entire body against the Labrador's warm side, could tug playfully at his ears, could attempt to mimic the dog's movements with his own clumsy coordination. Rusty displayed infinite patience. When Oliver pulled too hard during play, Rusty would gently disengage, demonstrating the boundaries of acceptable behavior without rejection. When Oliver became overexcited, racing around the living room on all fours in a bear equivalent of zoom eyes, Rusty would watch with what could only be described as amused tolerance, stepping in to redirect the cub only if he approached something dangerous. Most fascinating to the human observers was the communication that developed between the two animals. It went beyond body language, becoming a complex system of vocalizations, movements, and expressions that seemed mutually intelligible. Rusty would make a specific chuffing sound when he wanted Oliver to follow him, distinct from his playful bark or his warning growl. Oliver, in turn, developed his own vocabulary, a particular whine when he was hungry, a purring rumble when content, a frustrated huff when struggling with a task. "They're creating their own language," Sarah marveled, watching as Rusty guided Oliver through the process of retrieving a ball using subtle positioning of his body and a series of encouraging sounds. "I've never seen anything like it." Interspecies communication, Jack agreed, equally fascinated. "The ranger says it's not unheard of between domesticated animals, but it's rare to see it develop between a wild species and a domestic one." "Oliver doesn't know he's supposed to be wild," Lily pointed out, looking up from her notebook where she was recording Oliver's daily activities. "He thinks he's part of our family, just like Rusty." The truth of her observation hung in the air, unacknowledged but impossible to dismiss. With each passing day, the inevitable separation loomed larger in all their minds. On the morning of the 14th day, Oliver awoke to tension in his adoptive home. The cub had graduated to sleeping in a larger enclosure in Lily's room, with Rusty stationed faithfully outside it. He sensed the change immediately, something in the way the humans moved, the hushed urgency of their voices, the strange energy that permeated the cabin. Rusty felt it too. The Labrador was unusually subdued, staying closer than normal to Oliver as they went through their morning routine. When Jack opened the cabin door, letting in a blast of cold air and the blinding brightness of sun on fresh snow, Rusty positioned himself subtly between Oliver and the doorway. "The plow just reached the main road," Jack announced, his voice carefully neutral. "Ranger Ellis says they'll be here by noon." Lily's face crumpled, though she tried to hide it by burying her nose in Oliver's fur as she knelt beside him. The cub, now substantially heavier and more coordinated than the dying Scrap Rusty had rescued, nuzzled her cheek in response to her distress, leaving a damp spot from his cold nose. "He's not going to understand," she whispered, her arms tightening around Oliver's pudgy body. At nearly a month old, he had transformed into a healthy, curious bear cub, his eyes bright and alert, his movements increasingly confident. The Rehabilitation Center specializes in orphan bear cubs, Sarah reminded her gently. "They know how to care for him even better than we can, and they'll make sure he learns how to be a proper bear." But the words meant to comfort only underscored the reality they all faced. Oliver was leaving, and none of them, human or animal, were prepared for it. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Lily insisted on a final adventure for Oliver, guiding him through all his favorite activities. A game of hide-and-seek with Rusty, a supervised exploration of the kitchen, his paws leaving tiny damp prints on the tile, and a special meal of the formula he had now graduated to drinking from a shallow bowl. Rusty remained glued to Oliver's side, occasionally making soft, throaty sounds that seemed almost like reassurance. When Oliver tired mid-morning, the Labrador curled around him on the living room rug, creating a protective barrier of warm fur that lulled the cub into his last nap in the Morgan home. The sound of tires crunching on the recently cleared driveway came too soon. Oliver, startled awake by the unfamiliar noise, pressed himself against Rusty, his small body vibrating with anxiety. Rusty licked his head soothingly, but his own posture had stiffened, his eyes fixed on the door. Ranger Ellis was a tall woman with weather-beaten features and kind eyes that had seen too much wildlife tragedy to be sentimental. Still, she paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before her. The clearly thriving bear cub huddled against the protective Labrador, the red-eyed little girl hovering nearby, the parents standing with the awkward posture of people trying to do the right thing despite their emotions. "Well," she said after a moment, her voice softer than they had expected, "you folks have done an amazing job. This little guy was knocking on death's door when you called, and now look at him." "His name is Oliver," Lily said, a defiant wobble in her voice, "and he's learning to bark like Rusty, and he likes to splash in his water bowl, and he has a favorite blanket with stars on it." The ranger knelt to Lily's level, her expression gentle but firm. "It's obvious you've given him wonderful care, and that's exactly what he needed to survive. But now he needs something else. He needs to learn how to be a bear with other bears." "But he'll miss us," Lily whispered, tears spilling over, "and Rusty is teaching him things too." As if understanding the conversation, Rusty moved to stand beside Lily, while Oliver, sensing the mounting tension, made a soft whimpering sound and tried to hide behind the dog. What happened next surprised everyone. Ranger Ellis, after observing the animals for a long moment, sighed deeply. "I've been doing this job for 22 years, she said slowly, "and I've never seen anything quite like this." She gestured to Rusty and Oliver. Usually, domestic animals and wildlife maintain clear boundaries, even in rescue situations. This level of bonding is unusual. Is that bad? Sarah asked, hope and worry mingling in her voice. It complicates things, the ranger admitted. The truth is, this cub is already showing signs of imprinting on your dog primarily, but also on your family. At his age, and after 2 weeks of intensive human care. She trailed off, then continued more decisively. He can't be released back into the wild. That was always the case with a cub this young, without a mother to teach him survival skills. Normally, we'd place him in our rehabilitation facility with other orphaned cubs, minimizing human contact to prepare them for a semi-wild existence in his sanctuary. And now, Jack prompted when she paused. Ranger Ellis looked troubled. I'm concerned about the transition. The stress of separation at this critical developmental stage could be detrimental. She reached out slowly, allowing Oliver to sniff her hand. The cub retreated further behind Rusty, who remained watchful but didn't growl. He's bonded to your dog in a way that mimics the mother-cub relationship. Severing that bond abruptly could hurt him. Lily finished with a sudden fierceness in her young voice. You can't take him away from Rusty. It would be like losing his mom twice. The ranger straightened, her professional demeanor reasserting itself. I still need to take him to the rehabilitation center. They'll assess him properly, make sure he's healthy, and determine the best course of action. Seeing Lily's crestfallen expression, she added, but I'll make sure they understand the unique circumstances. The goodbye was heartbreaking. Despite the ranger's reassurances, Oliver, seemingly sensing the separation, became increasingly agitated as Ranger Ellis prepared the specialized transport carrier. When she finally had to place him inside, he emitted a high-pitched cry that triggered an answering howl from Rusty. The Labrador planted himself in front of the carrier, refusing to move until Jack gently pulled him aside by his collar. Lily sobbed openly, her small shoulders shaking. Sarah wasn't much better, pressing a tissue to her eyes as the ranger carried the carrier, now containing a frantically pawing Oliver, to her truck. Jack maintained his composure until the final moment when Oliver's desperate cries floated back through the closing door of the vehicle. Then he too turned away, his jaw clenched against unexpected emotion. Rusty's reaction was the most profound. As the truck disappeared down the snow-lined driveway, the Labrador broke free from Jack's grip and raced after it, barking desperately. When the vehicle passed beyond sight, he returned to the porch but refused to enter the house. Instead, he took up a vigil at the edge of the property, his gaze fixed on the road, waiting for a return that wouldn't come. That night, for the first time since Oliver's arrival, Rusty didn't sleep beside Lily's bed. Instead, he remained by the front window, occasionally whining softly, his vigilance unbroken even as the household around him fell into an uneasy sleep. The weeks that followed were difficult for everyone. Lily retreated back into herself, her brief reawakening extinguished by Oliver's absence. Her schoolwork, which had shown improvement during the bear cub's stay, once again became a struggle. The cabin, which had been filled with the sounds of play and discovery, felt oppressively quiet. Rusty suffered perhaps the most visibly. The Labrador lost interest in his usual activities, no more proudly presented sticks, no more enthusiastic greetings when Jack returned from infrequent trips to town. He ate mechanically when food was placed before him, but without his customary gusto. Most concerning, he developed a habit of disappearing into the forest for hours, returning exhausted but restless, as if searching for something he couldn't find. I'm worried about him, Sarah confessed to Jack one evening, watching as Rusty lay listlessly by the fire, his eyes half closed but his body tense. It's like he's grieving. He is grieving, Jack replied quietly. We all are, in our way. But it's hit him hardest because he doesn't understand why Oliver was taken. Any word from the rehabilitation center? Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. They'd called weekly since Oliver's departure, receiving polite but uninformative updates that the cub was adjusting and healthy. Nothing new, Jack confirmed. But Ranger Ellis did say she'd be stopping by sometime next week, something about a follow-up assessment of where we found him. Sarah nodded absently, her thoughts still with their mourning dog. Maybe we should get another puppy, she suggested, without much conviction. Something to distract him. Jack shook his head. I don't think that's the answer. He's not missing just any companion. He's missing Oliver specifically. The bond they formed was different. The truth of his words hung between them, a shared understanding of something they'd witnessed but couldn't fully explain. The inexplicable connection between a hunting dog and a bear cub that had transcended species and instinct. Ranger Ellis's visit came sooner than expected. Just 8 weeks after taking Oliver, her truck appeared in their driveway on a crisp spring morning. Rusty, who had been dozing on the porch, leapt to attention at the sound of the engine, his entire body quivering with sudden energy. He remembers, Lily whispered, watching from the window as the dog raced to meet the vehicle, circling it with frantic enthusiasm. He thinks she's bringing Oliver back. Sarah placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, preparing her for disappointment. Honey, remember what we talked about. Oliver needs to be with other bears now. But when the ranger stepped out of her truck, her serious expression bore a hint of something unexpected, amusement perhaps, or satisfaction. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, she greeted them as they came onto the porch. And Lily? And of course, Rusty. She bent to offer her hand to the dog, who sniffed it thoroughly, then looked past her to the truck, his tail slowing in confusion. I've come to discuss something important with you, Ranger Ellis continued, straightening. May I come in? I've brought some materials we should review together. Once settled at the kitchen table with coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for Lily, the ranger opened a folder containing official-looking documents. As you know, Oliver couldn't be released into the wild due to his age and circumstances, she began. What you don't know is that he's been presenting some challenges at the rehabilitation center. Jack and Sarah exchanged concerned glances. What kind of challenges? Jack asked cautiously. Nothing health-related, the ranger hastened to assure them. He's physically thriving. The issue is behavioral. Despite our best efforts to integrate him with other orphaned cubs, he's shown significant stress responses. He's not developing typical bear social behaviors, and he's displaying unusual vocalizations that our experts believe he learned here, specifically from your dog. Lily couldn't suppress a small smile at this, which she quickly hid behind her mug. Additionally, Ranger Ellis continued, he's demonstrating what we call proximity-seeking behaviors toward human caretakers, particularly those with dogs. Our lead rehabilitator has a Chesapeake Bay Retriever that Oliver follows obsessively whenever it's nearby. He misses Rusty, Lily stated with the simple certainty of a child. Under the table, Rusty's ears perked up at the mention of his name. The ranger nodded, a reluctant acknowledgement. Our wildlife behaviorist believes Oliver imprinted on Rusty during a critical developmental window. This happens occasionally with orphaned wildlife raised by humans, but it's usually the humans they imprint on. This dog-bear bond is unprecedented in our experience. What does this mean for Oliver? Sarah asked, leaning forward. Ranger Ellis took a deep breath. It means we're considering an experimental approach. The Rehabilitation Center is developing a new program for cases like Oliver's. Animals that can't be fully re-wilded but might thrive in controlled, semi-natural environments with the right support system. Jack's brow furrowed. What exactly are you proposing? A foster family arrangement, the ranger explained, pushing a document across the table. Under strict guidelines and with regular monitoring, Oliver would live in a purpose-built enclosure on private land, with limited but ongoing contact with his imprinted family unit. You want to bring him back here, Sarah breathed, understanding dawning. Your property meets the minimum acreage requirements, Ranger Ellis confirmed. And you've already demonstrated appropriate care protocols. With proper fencing, shelter construction, and adherence to our feeding and enrichment guidelines, she gestured to the papers before them. Oliver could come home. The kitchen erupted in chaos. Lily shrieked with joy, launching herself at the startled ranger in a hug that nearly toppled them both. Rusty, picking up on the excitement, began barking and spinning in circles. Jack and Sarah, more restrained but no less affected, bombarded the ranger with questions about requirements, timelines, and responsibilities. This isn't a decision to take lightly, Ranger Ellis cautioned once order was somewhat restored. A black bear can live 30 years in captivity. This is a lifetime commitment to a wild animal that will grow to several hundred pounds. The enclosure alone will cost thousands to build properly, and the annual care expenses are significant. We understand, Jack said, sharing a look with Sarah that contained an entire conversation. But if Oliver needs us, needs Rusty, then we want to make this work. The program requires community support, the ranger continued. Educational components. Local involvement. This isn't just about one family taking in a bear. It's about creating a model for wildlife conservation that engages people directly. I could do presentations at school, Lily exclaimed, already bouncing with ideas. And we could make videos about Oliver to teach people about black bears. Ranger Ellis smiled, her professional reserve softening. That's exactly the kind of thinking we're looking for. And based on Oliver's unique story, I believe there would be considerable interest, maybe even funding support from conservation organizations. As the adults discussed logistics, permits, and construction plans, Rusty settled at Lily's feet, his tail thumping steadily against the floor. For the first time in weeks, the tension had left his body. Somehow, in his dog's understanding of the world, he knew that his bear pupil was coming back. The spring air carried the scent of fresh-cut lumber and new beginnings. For 6 weeks, the Morgan property had buzzed with activity as Oliver's enclosure took shape, an acre of forested land enclosed by specialized fencing, complete with a den structure, climbing features, and a small pond. Local businesses had donated materials, wildlife enthusiasts had volunteered labor, and a regional conservation group had provided a grant to offset costs. Inside the cabin, Lily put the finishing touches on a welcome sign while Rusty paced restlessly between the window and door, sensing that today was significant. Jack and Sarah double-checked the feeding station they'd constructed according to the Rehabilitation Center's specifications, filling it with the approved diet of fruits, vegetables, and specially formulated bear chow. They're here. Lily's shout sent Rusty racing to the door, his entire body vibrating with anticipation. Through the window, they could see the Wildlife Service truck pulling up, followed by a small convoy of vehicles, the local newspaper, representatives from the conservation group, and Ranger Ellis in her official capacity. What followed was a carefully choreographed reintroduction. Oliver, now 4 times his original size, with a glossy black coat and bright, curious eyes, was released into the enclosure through a specialized transport tunnel. The humans kept their distance, as specified in the protocol, allowing the young bear to explore his new environment without pressure. Rusty, however, had no patience for protocols. The moment Oliver's scent reached him, he bolted toward the enclosure, slipping through the designated dog access gate that had been incorporated into the design. The bear and dog froze at the sight of each other, a moment of suspended animation that had the watching humans holding their breath. Then Oliver made a sound, half bark, half bear huffing, that was instantly recognizable to the Morgans as his rusty call. The Labrador responded with a joyous bark and bounded forward, meeting the bear cub in a reunion that defied easy description. There was no human language for the communication that flowed between them, body postures, vocalizations, scent exchanges. But its meaning was unmistakable: recognition, longing. Lily slipped her hand into her mother's, tears streaming unashamedly down her face. "They remember each other," she whispered. "Of course they do," Sarah replied softly, her own eyes damp. "Some bonds can't be broken, not even by time or distance." Later, as the officials and visitors departed, the Morgan family gathered on the observation deck built alongside the enclosure. Oliver had settled comfortably in his new habitat, currently engaged in examining every inch of the pond with Rusty supervising from the shore. The bear occasionally paused to call to the dog, who would respond with a reassuring woof. "It won't always be easy," Jack reminded them, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "He's still a wild animal, and he'll grow and change in ways we can't predict." "But he's our wild animal," Lily stated firmly, "and we're his family. Not like a pet family. Like a special family that helps him be the best bear burrow he can be." From his position by the pond, Rusty looked up at them, his expression carrying a distinctly satisfied air. In his dog's understanding of the world, things had been set right. His unusual pupil had returned, his family was happy, and his purpose, to protect and guide, had been affirmed. Oliver, sensing his mentor's distraction, emerged from the water with a splash and bumped his head against Rusty's side in a gesture that was pure bear but executed with dog-like affection. The Labrador responded by initiating a game they had played in the cabin, a modified version of tag that now had room to expand across the enclosure. As they watched the unlikely pair race through the dappled forest light, the Morgans understood that they were witnessing something rare and precious, a friendship that transcended species and circumstances, that had somehow found a way to flourish despite all odds. It was, in its way, a testament to the unexpected connections that can transform lives and open hearts. For Rusty, Oliver was the pupil who had become family. For Oliver, Rusty was the bridge between the wild he came from and the world he now inhabited. And for the humans who shared their lives, they were a daily reminder that love, in all its forms, finds a way to endure.